Welcome to the Hustle and Flow podcast.
A platform we use to explore varying perspectives and opinion through candid conversation.
We chat about philosophy, business, and all things life. I'm Shaun the Hustle.
And I'm Les the Flow.
Let's go.
All right, guys. Today I've got a topic for us to talk about, Shauno. And I think, again, in light of the current situation that everyone in the world is facing, we're recording this in early May 2020, and also, I guess, reflecting on a more individual level, we each face a number of challenges day to day. And like I said, collectively as a people, we are all facing the same sort of challenges with COVID-19. So I thought challenges could be something that we can talk about in all respects. I don't want to talk about it just with the context of current day, but I think it's a good platform for us to kick off and talk about all things challenges.
Cool, man. I think it's a cool topic to discuss today.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, when we talk about challenges in the current context, obviously we don't need to cover too much here in terms of COVID-19. Obviously, this is a global pandemic that everyone is facing, and everyone knows that there are huge ramifications to everyday life operations, and everyone is being faced with a number of challenges, whether it's at a macro level or a micro level, right? So I don't want to focus too much, as I said, on that. I think that topic is quite tired, and there's plenty of content out there about COVID-19 and the challenges it presents to people. But how about in terms of personal challenges? If I ask you, Shauno, what sort of challenges have you felt like you've faced yourself during this period?
Yeah, so for me, challenges that I've faced during this period is one of the biggest challenges for me has been in relations to how I run business and how I run my life and how I go about my daily life, right? Which I think is the case for everyone. It's like how you work and then how you live and your movements. That's what's been mostly impacted. So for me, I run my own business, and the way that I've been able to operate has changed drastically, right? And my business has been affected drastically. So I'm in the fitness industry. I do wholesale and retail supplements, and a lot of my clients have been shut down. Their businesses have been shut down. It's gyms, it's coaches, it's trainers, people in the fitness industry. So gyms have been shut down. You're limited in, if you're a personal trainer, to how you can coach people. At the moment, it's just one-to-one outdoors. And, a lot of people that run their own gyms, run their own fitness businesses have had to close. And with that, hand in hand goes, the consumables and things that they buy in relation to their business, which is supplements. And even the people that they were training, a lot of people that were training with coaches, training in gyms have stopped their fitness regimens, right? Or it's drastically changed, and the way they go about things and things like supplements have kind of taken the back seat for them. I've been blessed that I've got, regular clients who are still really serious about their health, and, our products are a big part of their lives, which they use going forward to help them pursue their goals and for their performance and their recovery. So that's great, because, we've still got a customer base that's going, but in terms of a large portion of our business, it's actually just halted, and we can't operate. So working around that, and also diverting attention to different areas and trying to essentially plug gaps, right, and fill holes. That's been challenging. And also, one thing that's been really challenging for me personally has been seeing how this has affected a lot of my good friends and people that I'm close to and people around me. So some of them have just completely lost their businesses, right? They're not going to be able to start up again or recover the way that they hoped they would be able to. Circumstances and different elements have just made it so that it's not going to be an option for them, right? Or when they do start up again, It's going to be vastly different, very difficult. They're going to have to build up their client bases again. They're going to have to build up their businesses again. And they're anxious about it. They're really worried, right? So like being around that energy all the time is challenging. And, I guess the relationships that I have with a lot of people, I'm fortunate in that people do come to me for advice in certain things, right? So they want to talk about things, they want to work through things, but it's also like quite energetically draining at times, right? And it's hard. It's hard to see people around you being affected the way that people are being affected. It's hard to see them in a tough spot. It's hard to see them feel like, things are crashing down around them, and to feel like they can't do anything about it. But, a lot of the conversations I have, there's a lot you could do about it. Like there's a lot that you can do about your situation, and you got to have that sovereignty and, work out how you're going to move forward and push forward. So yeah, that's been a challenge for me. And I guess the other thing that's been challenging is just like altering how I live my life, right? I'm out a lot. Like I see people a lot. I'm out on the road a lot. And just the way that not just business wise, but personally, like I meet up with people. I like that. Have coffee with people all the time throughout the day, throughout the week. It's how I catch up, have conversations in person. I much prefer to speak to people in person than on the phone and message. And that's all I have to stop. So like how I like to live my life, I can't at the moment. So that's been challenging just from a personal point of view of I just can't do what I want to do. But everybody's in that situation in some different respect, There's some people that are loving this time and being indoors. Personally, I'm not one of them. Like I like going out. I like being able to meet up with people, frequent places. That's how I like to live my life. So having to adjust to that and, not going out unless it's necessary, being at home all the time, working from home, we do work from home a lot, both you and I. So it's not something new for us, but given the choice, I'd be out. So they're the challenges I'm facing at the moment. And it's just working out ways to, keep yourself in a good frame of mind. I think that's also a challenge. That's a challenge I'm facing as well, for sure. I'm all about positivity and gratitude, but it's hard, man, when you're like, also there's something to be said about feeling physically confined that definitely has a play on your mental.
That's interesting. I think in terms of how we each face particular challenges will be a good way to, follow on from, describing our own challenges and how we each deal with them. That would be good for, I guess, the audience to have a listen to, potentially different takes on approaching challenges that everyone or a lot of people are facing right now, right? Yeah. So it'll be good for us to follow on with that. Cool. So I guess from there I could talk to my own challenges as well.
Yeah, man, for sure.
To round out this part of the conversation. You mentioned the people who are enjoying this time. That's me. I'm one of those people. So in terms of staying at home, it's not, it hasn't been a challenge for me at all. I'm actually thriving in this environment. It's what I sort of enjoy the most. Just solitude and time alone is great for me. I guess the counter to that is that, my family are around a lot more at home because they've been forced to work from home and things like that. So I like to maintain a nice harmonious space, but that can be challenged by, the presence of other people and their activities around. So my wife is working from home, and she has been for the last 5 or so weeks. And, it's not that I don't like her company, but obviously it is, it's nice to have my own space to work. So that I wouldn't say it's been a difficult challenge. It's just very different. Like you said, it's contending with this different mode of operation. And I guess there's a lot of chatter as well that surrounds, these global matters around the world. And those are the types of challenges that I find difficult to ignore, because again, the people around me, that's all they really talk about, COVID-19 this, COVID-19 that, what their challenges are, blah, 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 blah. And I do my best to ignore that stuff. I don't watch the news. I don't stay abreast of that sort of stuff. I hear it from everyone else around me. It's almost like I don't need to watch the news. Like people just tell me because they are informed, or they keep their finger on the pulse in terms of this sort of stuff. But that's just my personal choice not to delve too deeply or at all into that type of media stream. So again, that's another avenue that those sorts of things are sort of creeping in to my space, and it is presenting somewhat of a challenge for me to, keep that out, so to speak. Other than that, I mean, I guess most of my challenges that I'm facing, given that we are being afforded so much personal space, is how generally people are sort of navigating through these times, and how they're, at least the people around my area, or the people that I have interactions with, or social distance interactions, of course, how they are very lackadaisical about what is going on. Even immediate family members thinking that it's not so serious an issue. But I think that that flows quite deeper, much deeper than I think. Much deeper than I think it is. I think that the stem of that that annoyance or that challenge for myself is something a bit more deep-seated in the way I expect or hold expectations for certain things. And I think we can talk about that a little bit later in terms of those more challenging internal challenges that we each face on a day-to-day basis. But yeah, I'm interested to hear from you, man. What sort of things have you been implementing, or how have you been sort of navigating through these challenges? Of what sort of practical things have you been using to help you through this time?
Yeah, man. So I think one of the things is definitely controlling what is going in, like what's coming in, which is, the information that I'm choosing to be exposed to, and how much I go over that internally, and I guess the importance and weight that I give it, right? Because as you said, everybody's got their own opinions about what's happening right now. Some people are being like quite lax about it. Some people are being super cautious about it. And it's one of those things that I think uncovers a lot. This current situation uncovers how people operate, and what's important to them, and how they move about their lives has just been exposed a bit more, right? Because you've got people that, are quite relaxed about things in your life, and then you'll have other people that are, quite uptight about other things, and it's coming through right now. And I think another challenge that we face is when you have people around you or that are close to you that they're on the opposite end of the spectrum of that, right? So like an issue or something that you think is an issue is not an issue for them, and vice versa. Something that they think is like quite an issue just does not even register on your radar as an issue at all, or a challenge. And how you approach that, it can put strain on the relationship you have with people, right? Because there's a mismatch of essentially of values that come into play. And so for that, one thing I've been doing is just trying to meet people where they're at and understand where they're at and where they're coming from. Like whenever I have a conversation with someone, and I'm always mindful about that. That's one of the things I use to, stay on track, I guess, and not be overrun with things that just keep going around your head, float around. It's difficult to contend with and stops me from doing other things, because that's also challenging, right? Is you take in so much and it's just marinating inside your mind. And then if you're not careful and conscious about what you're thinking about, it can overrun you. And then that stops you from doing things that you should be doing or that you want to be doing. And our minds have a way of running away like that, I find. I'm trying not to, I guess, get so caught up as well in just one end of the spectrum of information either. Like I'm trying to keep an open mind. I think, there's, for any of us, there's so much information out there, and you can really find someone to confirm your bias these days without too much effort.
Totally.
So, I'm trying to look at both ends of any argument and then see what makes sense to me and then move forward from that point of view. Because otherwise, if you just keep toing and froing and, you listen to everything and give everything the same weight, it's very hard to move forward, right? You're always just stuck in this kind of weird middle ground. You don't know if you should move forward or, step back. And there's this old story they tell about this donkey, right? And to the right of the donkey, there was some food. And then to the left of the donkey, there was some water. And the donkey was hungry and he was thirsty. So he looked right and he thought, oh, should I eat the food? And then he's like, oh, but I'm thirsty. So he looks left and he goes, should I go to the water? And he's like, oh, wait, but maybe I need to eat because I'm hungry. And if I'm hungry, I'll starve. And then he thinks about it, oh, but I'm thirsty. And if I don't drink, it might be really bad and I might be dehydrated and I'll die. And then he keeps looking at the food and then he looks back at the water and he keeps thinking if he should eat and if he should drink. And then eventually the donkey just drops and he dies because he never made a decision one way or the other. Right. And I think it's really easy to do that in a whole range of areas in your life. And taking in information, what you do with it is one of those things. It's like, yes, you take it in, but you need to synthesize and then do something about it.
Totally. And I think it's rather poignant, especially in today's world with the amount of information that comes through that and is available to us. I mean, like you said, you can almost find, supporters for any bias if you, search hard enough. And I think we've talked about it before in the podcast, and that it can become a little bit of an echo chamber if you surround yourself with people who want to shout the same things and just, prop up your ideals and your idealistic views about certain things. So open mind is absolutely one of those things that is helpful to just prime your I guess your ability to, before entering any sort of conversation or any sort of judgment or making any sort of subjective view on anything. If you enter anything with an open mind, at least you understand that you're not there to just believe the first thing that you hear, but you're there to take in every single view of information or interpretation that's available to you, right?
Yeah.
And again, the important part is to synthesize that information and be able to make the best judgment and interpretation and view for yourself. What makes sense for you, not what makes sense for whoever told you or who shouted the loudest or who had the most convincing argument, right? That doesn't necessarily make it true or right. I think it comes back to this analogy or this very famous view of money. Everyone believes that money has value, but if no one did, then it really would be just a piece of plastic or a piece of paper with a couple of numbers on it. It only holds value because most of the world believes in its value. So that's something to take from there. I think in terms of the other things we were talking about, in terms of what you can control or not, I think that's important.
Yeah.
It's very important. I mean, I will talk about it from an individual standpoint, right? And to use a Taoist or a Buddhist analogy, they say that, you know, each individual is a drop in the greater ocean, right? And to try and convince someone or try to push against another's views is similar to attempting to change the direction of the tide in the ocean as a drop, you know. So what that sort of says is that, you know, there is one side of things that's just simply inevitable. It's nature, you know, it is what it is. So we can accept it for what it is and go with the flow, or we can let it take us kicking and screaming, you know. So I think in terms of like contention of views, that in itself you can apply that way, in that you can't influence or tell someone what to believe, and vice versa, right? No matter how strongly you believe in one thing or another, someone else's views is someone else's views, and this comes back to this view of open-mindedness, right?
Mm.
And like I can talk to this on a personal level too, because, you know, I think a lot of people would have experienced this throughout their entire lives, in that it can get quite annoying, or can upset you when you believe so strongly about something, you know, you hold it so, like, this conviction in your heart is so strong and so clear, but the person you're trying to tell, they're just not having a bar of it, you know. It's like talking to a brick wall, and it can get very frustrating, especially if you feel like it's for the, you know, quote unquote good of the other person, you know. I'm just trying to help you, you know. Why won't you see that it's for your own good? Blah 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 blah. I mean, I can gather, and I'll wager that a lot of the audience have been in such situations, you know. With, it happens a lot with loved ones, you know, friends and family, people you're close to. You just want the best for them, and you feel like, you know, such a strong conviction towards one certain way or approach to life, but they just don't see it for whatever reason. But you got to also think about that on the flip side, and this is what you were talking about before, in terms of seeing someone else's point of view. And like a classic example is like your parents, you know. I feel this with my parents a lot, especially my dad, you know. They're just old school people. They were raised in different times, you know. Their sense of survival and their sense of struggle and necessity is very different to mine, you know. I was raised in, you know, the 90s and the noughties, and I've never had any feeling that I was ever going to not have money or food on the table. But they lived a very classic immigrant story of coming from overseas to a foreign country with less than $100 in their pocket, and they had to try and make it happen, you know. They had to try to just survive day to day. And it's a very different mindset that is cultivated and built in someone of that generation versus mine. So, you know, we always think or try and talk to certain points of view from our own experiences, what we've, you know, experienced in our lives. But we also, again, have to consider that they have walked a different path. They've seen different things. And of course, they're going to see the world and interpret it in a different way. It's just natural, because each experience that you have, it sort of compiles and builds the character to who you are as a person, the values and principles you hold, you know. It forges the lens which you perceive the world through. So it sort of makes sense that if someone who experienced adolescence, you know, in the early 1900s versus someone in the 2000s, obviously the perception of life is going to be drastically different.
Yeah. I think like challenges are all relative depending on who you are and what you've been through. And that's another thing about challenges, right? Is that like just because something is challenging for you does not mean it's challenging for someone else and should register on their radar as being of importance to them, right? There's plenty of challenges that I face that I know mean nothing to other people. And also vice versa. Some people, you see them going through things and it's very challenging for them, but for you, it's nothing. And I think that's another thing that is challenging in itself, right? Is acknowledging that. And, one thing always is whenever I'm in contact with someone, I never want them to feel like I don't think they're important, right? Because everybody is important in their own way. And not in like an airy fairy way, like, oh, everybody's worthy and everybody's important. Not like that. Everybody is important, right? Everybody is the star of their own show. And everybody's trying to move forward with things they want. For the most part, most people are trying to do their best, if only for themselves, but everybody's got their own things going on. And you have to appreciate that. And you also have to appreciate that just because something is important to you doesn't mean it's important to someone else, right? And then on the flip side of that, it's if something is important to someone else and it's not important to you, doesn't mean it's not important. It might be very important for them. And the way in which you operate and you approach that person, has to change based on that. You got to be mindful of that. Especially during this time, like I mentioned earlier, that I think it's uncovering a lot of disparity in people's values. Like if you're in a relationship with someone and you're, in isolation with them and you live together and one of you thinks that something's really serious and the other one doesn't, you're going to have, a lot of mixed feelings on your hands and a lot of tensions between the two of you. Yep. You're going to have to work through that. And the only way you're going to work through that is if you guys acknowledge that, it's important. It's important to one of you and it's not important to the other. And then move from that space and from that notion that, just because it's not important to you doesn't mean it's not important.
Yeah.
And I think, making it really clear to people what's important to you, if something is important to you, not just letting that shit slide. That's a big part of overcoming a challenge if you're experiencing one with someone else, right? Is like really voicing what's important, what matters to you. Because that's another thing, man. You can't expect people to just read your mind and automatically, give a shit about something because you do. That's something I learned, not like quite recently and quite later in my life. There'd be people around me that I know care about me and love me, and there would be something that's important to me and they just didn't seem to care. And I used to think, if it's important to me, it should be important to them. And that's just not the case, because I realized, on the flip side of that, there's things that are important to them, that I know are important to them, that I just don't give a shit about. So if that's the case and they've got things that are important to them and I don't care about it, why should I expect them to give a shit about the things that are important to me? Unless I put that out to them, let them know it's important. And then it's up to them whether they do something about that or not, whether they give it importance because they want to treat me a certain way or be a certain, be there for me in a certain way. And vice versa. If someone tells me something's important to them and it wasn't to me, I then have that choice to decide what I do about it. If now I'm going to give it weight, if I'm going to give it importance in my own mind and do something about it in the way that they want me to, because I care about that person. And I think having those acknowledgements and being open allows you to overcome any sort of challenge you might have in that space.
I think that's super important. I mean, there's a few key principles there in terms of acknowledging that there are things that are important to others and may not be for you, and vice versa. And then the choice behind whether you choose to make it important in your life based on your relationship with that and the importance of the relationship, right? So that is important to note. So a prime example is like a relationship between a man and a woman, or any sort of loving relationship, right? A life partner, not necessarily man and woman. Just any relationship with a life partner, right? You're always going to have contending views. But if it's something that is just something you cannot stand for, then the choice is there in terms of helping you navigate that challenge, right? It's like you either feel convinced enough of your love and care for that person that you would come to some sort of consensual agreement about what it is that is important, or you understand that it's not a relationship that you can continue to pursue going forward, and it's as simple as that. It really is. I mean, I think that another point that I wanted to come back to, and I think is super important, is that you mentioned that people are surprised at times that you might have differing views, or they may not care about something that you care about, or vice versa. There's an expectation there, right? To me, that is more the status quo than anything else. You should go into any relationship or any interaction with anyone. It doesn't need to be a relationship, and not assume that they care about the same things you do.
Yeah.
Because not everyone is the same. Not everyone has been brought up in the same way as you. Not everyone has experienced life the same way you have, and not everyone cares about the same shit that you do, or everyone in the world does, or you think everyone in the world does, right? It's very important. Like, I think that should be the status quo. But there is no blanket in terms of what people care about, There truly isn't. And I'm just talking about from this, modern culture, modern society viewpoint. There's this expectation that everyone cares about, all the generic stuff, what you look like, what type of job that you have, the amount of money that you make, all that sort of stuff. It just isn't the case, People might say they do, right? But perhaps they haven't thought about it hard enough. Perhaps they don't feel like they have the choice to make yet. Perhaps they're just saying that those things are important to them because there are a number of pressures in the world that make them feel like they need to, prioritize those sorts of things,
I think like one of the most important words you said was expectation, right? And I think the expectations that you have, more so of a situation or of other people, they contribute to the way you approach the challenge, right? And just how you approach anything. If you've got expectations that end up being correct, or assumptions that are correct, then it works out great for you. But if you have expectations that don't actually align with what the reality is, you're going to be in for a rude shock, and you're probably not going to be in the best position to deal with any challenge you're facing, right? Or it's going to be much harder for you. And I think that it's really important for people to acknowledge that the expectations that you hold, they're yours. They're not that of the other person a lot of the time. It's different if you're with someone and you both operate out of the same context for a long time. You've both been in the same sort of situation. You have this, meeting of the minds, and you see eye to eye on a lot of things. In that sort of situation, yes, your expectations might hold true. And when you're dealing with something together or something that affects that person, your expectations might help you to move through that challenge and arrive at a spot you want. Because like when you look at it, really a challenge is something like there's a difficulty or a hurdle to overcome. And then you use the tools you have available to you to move past, either jump over that hurdle, move around it, move through it, whatever it is, to then be at a place that you want to be at, right? That's the challenge. But if you have certain expectations and the other person you're dealing with through a challenge doesn't have it, might not go so well for you. And so that's the other thing, I think, is to not have expectations in that situation. That's important.
Yeah.
That's one thing for me in dealing with challenges recently. It's like to not have an expectation of how something is or how the other person is. Right? There are always going to be certain situations where you do have an expectation, right? You've been in this situation a million times before. Or it's something small and you know how it generally turns out. So you have an expectation. So that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about when there's significant challenges ahead, something you have to move through that's not just going to be easily bowled over. And there's more to take into consideration than just a couple of simple decisions.
Yeah.
Right? The expectations you have are going to affect how you move through and approach the challenge. And I think it's important to understand that your expectations are yours. And things that you're assuming might not actually be the case. So it's generally tends to work more in your favor if you don't have expectations around certain things. And really assess as you move along what the reality is. That's your alternative, right? You can either expect and assume and then operate out of that, or you can hold back and or not have the expectations and not make assumptions and then gather data, essentially, right? Start to move through, take feedback, work out what's happening, and then adjust and act accordingly to that, instead of thinking you know what's going to happen or having this idea or notion in your mind that this is how it's going to be or this is how it should be, which is another very dangerous spot to be in, right? Like, it should be like this, because a lot of the times it's not how you think it should be. You need to play for where you're at. I think that's really important when you're dealing with any sort of challenge. You really need to play for where you're at. You use the tools that you have, like past experiences, what you've gone through. You have an idea. You might have been there before, so you know how to deal with it, but you still need to assess the situation at hand and not just be so presumptive, make assumptions and have expectations how it's going to turn out.
Yeah. And I think, look, the way I interpret that, and it's, again, I think to echo your sentiment in that it's not so much to blankly go around through life without putting expectations on anything, right? But the viewpoint really is that, there with that, perspective on things or that view on things, is that there is an held notion that there are things that are always going to be outside of our control or outside of our, prediction of what could happen. There's always those things that are in play, no matter how unlikely they are. Even in your example of smaller, more trivial situations where you've done them time and time again, there could still be something that happens that is completely out of your control. It's like that whole adage of you don't know if you're going to cross the road one day and get hit by a bus, right? You've crossed the road a million times before, but what's to say it wouldn't happen the next time you cross the road? You just don't know, right? And I think that's an important thing to consider. I think, and generally, I will say that generally, in that there has to be an element of this in everything that you think of, because again, that comes with the level of humility towards your view on life, in that you don't know everything. And for the most part, we're sort of just cruising around and we're just acting on the back of historic experience. But, our human history is minute in comparison to the history of all being and all earth, So it's important to take that view, because there are so many things that just could happen that can alter anything in the slightest way or the biggest way. We just don't know that, right? And I think with expectation, it comes with a level of naivete as well, right? There is an ignorance to it, to holding, solid expectation going into everything in life. And like you said, if it doesn't turn out the way you expected it to, then how well are you going to handle that situation as well, right? And that, again, it's not an unlikely scenario that things don't turn out exactly how you expect. More often than not, it's actually going to turn out outside of your expectation. It really is. And I think in terms of talking about what's within and outside of your control, right? You reflect on, Stoic philosophy back in ancient Greece, people like Seneca, Epictetus, and Marcus Aurelius, and things like that. They talk about, cultivating this inner resilience, and how they termed it was the inner citadel. It's like an inner stronghold, and they understand that whatever is outside of this, stronghold, it's outside of their control. But at the same time, their inner citadel could not be penetrated from these outside things because they are, in fact, outside of their control. All they can control is what's within, right? So that's even down to how you react to certain situations that, again, they may be undesirable to you or outside of your expectation. It's about cultivating this inner resilience, this inner citadel, as I said, as they call it. So that in itself is an important factor to hold when you talk about challenges as well, right? A way to deal with challenges, or a way to navigate them without holding too strongly to one thing or another in terms of outcomes or expectations.
Yeah, for sure. And also, like when you're dealing with expectations, it's dangerous, man, to just assume things a lot of times. Like I think about, say you take the example of a plane, right? And there's pilots on the plane. If you just expect that everything is maintained, if you expect that, everything's set up in the cockpit correctly because the mechanic should do that, and the wheels are as they should be filled because that's what you do when you take care of a plane, and everything else, that the gauges should be working, that this lever should be in the right position in case I need to use it, that there might be a life jacket if I need it, things like that, right? You make those expectations, and if it doesn't turn out to be the case, you're going to be in a lot of trouble, right? And that's why pilots, before they take off on a flight, they check everything themselves. They check themselves, right? And you can take that figuratively too, like they check themselves. And they check everything. They check that the gauges are working. They check that the things that they might need are in place. They check that things are at the levels that they should be at. They don't just assume or expect that it's going to be that way. And that the reason that's important is so, there are things that you can control. And that's one of the things you can control. And then if you know that everything is in place that you need it to be, and it's actually the way that it should be, the way you operate from there is much different to if you find yourself having an expectation of something, you arrive at the point at which you expect it to be at, and you're not there. You're going to be in a whole lot of trouble. No, it's important, I think, to play for reality and to check things and to check yourself.
Yeah, totally. I think it's just like you can put it a number of different ways, and I think, practically speaking, it's really just risk adverse approach to things, right?
Yeah.
Having a lens and a view for risk of certain things, and trying to mitigate that as best as possible to whatever is within your control.
Yeah.
And it can be as as serious and potentially dangerous as being a pilot in an airplane carrying hundreds and hundreds of lives, or it can be something very small and personal. But at the same time, those things you just take a different approach to it. But there's also, you look at things like possibility and probability. You just look at those things in all aspects of what you can do, and it just talks to, again, preparedness and control in entering situations, right? you do what you can do. Like you clean up your own backyard, you look after your own shit, as best as possible.
Yeah. And I think assessing things is important. Like when it comes to any challenge, it's like making a good assessment prior to any action you're about to take to try and overcome the challenge. Because if you just move full force without actually taking the lay of the land, you might end up expending a lot more effort than you have to, or you might go about it the wrong way for the outcome that you wanted to achieve. Whereas if you just kind of take a step back, take a moment, or take a bit more than a moment for some things and assess the situation, you're probably far more likely to get the outcome you want. And I think that's another really important part, is focusing on the outcome that you want. Right? I think a lot of times when we're faced with a challenge, there's like this immediate thing that makes us feel uncomfortable, or, something we have to deal with, and it rushes at us fast. And your reaction a lot of the time is to just do something to fix it. Whereas sometimes you need to just slow down. So that's one thing that I've been doing to, when I've been faced with challenges, not just recently, but, for a while now, is I just take a minute to slow down and assess, like, what is challenging about this and what outcome do I want? It's so important because if you just focus on the hurdle, there's a million ways you can tackle something, right? But where you want to end up is important. You know what I mean? Like, if say you're on the field and you're playing a contact sport and there's a massive dude that's in your way, you can either run at him, run through him, run around him. Now, if I run straight at him, I might end up real fucking hurt, break something. If I just take a moment, think, what do I want to achieve? I want to get to the other side of the field. And generally, I'd probably want to get there unscathed if I can. I might think, you know what? I'm not just going to run straight at him. I'm going to sidestep. I'm going to just try and pick up my speed and go around. And I'm going to end up where I want to be, which is the end of the field. And I'm not going to have any broken bones or a concussion or be massively hurt.
Yeah.
You need to stop and think about stuff. But a lot of times I think we just go, I need to get that spot, run, bang. And you're running straight into that dude, man.
Yeah.
And that's like just looking at the hurdle and you're focused on just the hurdle.
Totally.
Like, there's this phenomenon, and I don't know what they call it, but it happens on US roads. It's like on highways, right? And it's like you're going down this highway and there's actually nothing on either side of you, except there's telegraph poles from time to time. And there's people that drive down these highways and it's just desert on either side. There's nothing around, and they're driving and they're driving. There's nothing you could possibly hit. But then somewhere along the line, some unfortunate person finds himself wrapped around a telegraph pole, right? And it's because they're just like driving down this road and they see nothing. And then they suddenly see this telegraph pole. And for whatever reason, they just become fixated on it. And they could go anywhere. It's a fucking desert. You drive anywhere and nothing would happen to you. There's like a million directions you could turn your wheel, but you don't. They just go straight into that fucking telegraph pole. And it's because that's the only thing they're looking at. And I think it's something that we do when we're faced with a challenge, is we just keep looking at what the challenge is. And we don't think about where we actually want to be, where we want to go, right? Like if you're driving down that massive country road, you just want to keep going to get to your destination. And if you weren't focused on the telegraph pole, you'd just keep driving, you'd make the turns and you'd arrive at your destination safe and sound. But for that momentary second, it was a problem for them, right? They saw it, they're like, oh shit, there's this pole. What do I do? And they just hit the pole because they're not thinking about anything but the pole. Yep. And if you have some challenge that comes up in your life, if you just keep focusing on like, oh, this is going to be bad, this is going to turn out bad for me, you're not focusing on the solution and the outcome you want, you're going to run straight into that problem and you're going to have the problem. Whereas if you think about the outcome and where you want to be, you can move around it, right?
Yeah. And I think let's follow that thread a little bit more down that line. So we've talked about challenges in terms of overcoming things to from an intentional standpoint, to attain some level of growth, and I think the gym is just a good example of that. you face your challenges of lifting certain weights or running a certain speed to increase muscle mass or fitness or lose your weight or whatever it is, right? There's a intention behind that. But in terms of the challenges that you've been talking about for the last few minutes or so, those things may not be intentional. They may not be elective, right? We're not choosing them per se. They just present themselves, right? And I think it's a classic way for people in the modern world to deal with challenges, right? It's very solution based in terms of, not in terms of well, solution based is, it can be positive and negative in my mind, right? So I reflect back to my time in the corporate environment, and you think about how a corporate environment operates in terms of speed and pace. They're all about that. You know, if you do anything that is at a slower pace or is something that takes too much time, it's going to cost them money, and that's a big no-no, right? So it's always about cost benefit at the point in time. And what happens for the most part, right, 9 times out of 10, is that they want to go for a quick fix solution, right? So the analogy that I'll use, and talking about sports, right, the same sort of thing. If I broke my leg, their approach would be to stop the bleeding. And how do they do that? They'll put a Band-Aid on it, right? But my leg's still fucking broken, you know? Instead of going through the months and months of rehab, putting a splint in and, letting the bone mend and heal and, heal properly so it's straight, and then doing all the exercises to strengthen all the muscles surrounding the broken bone, just so that it comes back to a good working, balanced operational function. They'll just put a Band-Aid on it and say, okay, well, there's a bit of blood coming out there because, you broke your fucking leg and a bit of bone is sticking out, but we'll just chuck a Band-Aid on top. Oh, good as new, right? And later down the line, no matter how many Band-Aids you put on there, it's going to come back and bite you in the ass, right? So that's, again, a way of looking at things. A solutions-based approach isn't always necessarily the best way to go about things, in my mind, right? And this talks to your point before about taking a step back and looking at what the root cause is. What's the root cause of your issue? So if I've got a broken leg, obviously the bone is broken. It's snapped in half. So how do I fix that? The Band-Aid's not going to do much, is it? You've got to put the bone back together. You've got to allow it to heal however you need to. If it's bad enough, you've got to, put some screws in or whatever, figure out if there's any ligament damage or muscle damage or whatever, and tend to everything, the holistic picture, and make sure that everything is catered to, to ensure that the recovery is done properly. And, yes, it does take time, but in the long run, what is the alternative, or what is the outcome in the long run if you ignore something that is, at the core broken, or you continually just paint over it and just say it'll be okay because aesthetically it's good? It's eventually going to bite you in the ass, right? And I think a really good example, and I want to talk about specifics here, but in the corporate world, I used to be in the systems and IT world, project world, and they had these very old, antiquated systems, and the way they used to make enhancements to the system was obviously they write new code to allow the system to do different things to cater to the certain changes that they're introducing, right? But because the way that they writ the code, it was all about saving money and time, they took shortcuts, and they were just weaving these webs of code that eventually were impossible to unravel. But if you ever needed to go back and try to change something underneath all that web, it was impossible, and it would have taken you many years and millions of dollars, because It's just band-aid upon band-aid upon band-aid upon band-aid, you know? So I think that that's an important view to take of things. Like fast is not necessarily best in terms of solution, right? Especially if it doesn't, you know, cater to the root cause of the issue that you're dealing with.
Yeah. And I think like there's a lot to be said about that. Sometimes you need to act fast, you need to do things, but definitely not in all cases. And as you said, taking the time in a lot of different areas definitely yields you with a better outcome, because you can keep fixing something short term, but then long term it's going to bite you in the ass, right? And I think there needs to be an acknowledgement as well that there's a number of solutions, but some are better than others, and you need to choose accordingly. And taking your time in certain aspects and assessing the situation allows you to choose which is going to be the best solution, which is most likely to give you the outcome you want, right? Also, you can start to work out things like which is going to cause me the least amount of pain. Because that's another thing, right? When you have a challenge, generally it comes up as a challenge because there's some, or you view it as a challenge because there's some type of pain associated with it. There's something to be overcome, right? If it was all happy days and easy to do, it's not really a challenge, is it? But when we're confronted with some type of pain or some type of difficulty, which you are when there's a type of challenge, there's often many different solutions. And choosing the right one is going to dictate how you overcome that challenge, and if you overcome it or not, in a lot of cases too, right? And I think in line with what you were talking about as well, you might do something that fixes something short term, but then you're going to have a much bigger challenge down the road.
That's right.
Right? Like if you break a bone and you don't let it heal properly, you might not be able to walk properly later down the line. Right? So yeah, you might have, or any type of injury you have, that's something that people are able to relate to really easily. If you have some type of injury and you just like patch it, right? Over time, it's going to accumulate. The issues are going to accumulate and you're going to have much harder challenge down the road. Like people that have knee pain and stuff like that. You put up with it and you're like, oh, you know what? I'll just wear this brace. It's fine. It relieves the pressure. I'm just going to keep walking and walking and walking. And you think it was a little challenge. It was like I had some pain in my knee and I wanted the pain to go away. So you put this brace on. You keep walking on it. And then one day you go and you fucking play basketball and you land wrong and you pop something. And now you can't fucking walk. Right? Whereas if you're just taking the time to work out what the cause was of that pain, stretch, do something, actually do something about it that might have been harder, you wouldn't have this other big challenge later of now going through surgery. Now I have to learn how to walk again and go through all that massive pain. Because that's another thing, man. You can do short-term fixes for lots of things, but you're in for major hurt later. You know what I mean?
Totally.
Like if you plug a hole on a boat, it might be okay. You might get to where you need to go. But if you keep just like plugging the hole and then that falls through, you plug the hole again, even though it's a bit bigger, you can keep going for a little bit longer, but eventually the hole's going to get so big that you're going to sink your whole fucking shit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And like, that's why it's important. Yeah, it might be a solution, but some solution definitely better than others. And a lot of times the better solutions do take more time to come up with. So you got to give it that time.
Yeah. And I think to go back and expand upon what you were saying about having multiple solutions, absolutely. There are, a lot of solutions to fixing certain problems or approaching certain challenges, right? And I think context is important in terms of, and that should play a part into how you make a decision about which way to go, the choices you make. And we talk about this a lot, right? With choices, there always comes a sacrifice one way or another, but you have to weigh that up at that point in time as to what is important to you. To play back onto this example of injury and sports, right? Say it was like, you're a professional sportsman, and it was your last game in the championship game, and you had a broken leg, but you just needed to, get back on there and help the team win for the last 10 minutes of the game or whatever, and you know what you know what the long-term ramifications are, if you continue to play on this, this injured leg. The way you make the decision is very different, although I'm not necessarily saying there's a better answer one way or another. You know what the consequence is if you continue on that route. But what I'm trying to say is that at that point in time, in that particular context, for a professional athlete who has worked their entire life for, this particular moment, them being the last game, most important game of their career, perhaps it is a good option for them. And it's a sacrifice they're willing to take, to understand that, hey, if I continue playing this last 10 minutes, I can help them win the game and win a championship, but I may not walk ever again in my entire life. It might be worth it. It might not be. But the point is that you must know that each choice that you make with, every, I guess, approach to a challenge and a solution is that there are going to be, consequences and sacrifices one way or another.
I think that's the thing that's why assessing is important, because you have to try and ascertain what the consequences are going to be and what the outcome is, right? And that's the sort of thing, like why thinking about the outcome is important. Like that athlete in that situation, the outcome they may want is eternal glory. And if they play on that broken leg, people are going to know about it and they win the game. They're going to go down forever in history as this amazing athlete who put it all on the line. And conversely, they might go out, they might not perform so well and end up not being able to fucking walk again. But the glory is what's important to them. And that's why you need to figure out what's really important to you and what the outcome is that you want. And then you decide if you go for it or not. Right? But in that sort of situation, that's the only choice they have. They may never get that shot again. So, the risk might be worth the reward. There's a lot of times when the risk is not worth the reward.
But like, can you say that it's the only choice that they have though? Like, well, at the end of the day, there's another way to look at this, right? And I 100% get it because, I've been a sports fan for a long time and I understand, the glory and the Hall of Fame and all that sort of stuff, right? It's important to them. But everyone also knows that an athlete's, lifespan is very short. A lot of athletes don't carry on through their 40s. They're lucky if they play into their 40s, right? Mm-hmm. And they still have the rest of their lives to contend with, so you take away that layer of what's important to them at that point in time. What they've worked for their entire life is that, professional sports and athletic glory, but you take that away and then there's that, just that raw layer of just simply life and being a human being. They still have 40 odd years of, contending with this fucked up leg because they chose that at that point in time. And again, I'm not saying that one is right or wrong. And I'm not saying that, there is only one choice to be made here. But all I'm saying is that there's different layers to how you can view this, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And that's why I make the point that it's important to work out what's important to you and the outcome that you want, right? Because that's what's going to dictate how you move forward and if you're going to be happy with your decision or not.
Totally.
Right. And you've got to do it for what's important to you.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And that's why as well, you might take on some challenges that you might necessarily not want to take on yourself, but it's important to someone you care about. So therefore you make it important to you. Right. Back to what we were talking about before. It's like, it's all relative, man. It's all relative. But you got to you got to judge these things for yourself. and then
Yeah.
act accordingly.
I think that's
Another,
key.
yeah, like there's a lot of things when you're faced with a challenge, generally you tend to go to people and ask them for advice as well. And the advice that you're going to get is based on how that person views the situation and what's important to them. And the advice they give you on how to tackle a challenge might not actually be the best advice for you. It might work out for them if they're in the situation, but the fact is they're not in the situation, right?
Totally.
They might want a different sort of outcome to the outcome that you want, which is why it's important to assess for yourself, right? Assess what is important, assess the outcome you want, and then think about the different solutions and ways and paths you can take towards trying to get that outcome. Because that's another thing, man. Like, I think that's one big thing in how you deal with a challenge is listening to whose advice you take and being real mindful of whose advice you take and taking in the right advice and rejecting the poor advice.
Yeah.
You know.
And it's not to say that you shouldn't ask for advice, but it's also like an example, you and I, we've known each other for, over a decade, well over a decade now. And we've known each other in different guises, in different contexts. We have a different relationship now than we had when we first met,
Yeah.
right? But we understand each other to a good degree, I would say. Mm-hmm. But it also, in the same vein, it doesn't mean that everything that I give as advice to you or vice versa, if it's asked for, we're always going to take it, and that's important to know. Like, even though you're one of the people who I trust most, it doesn't mean that I'm going to take everything that you say as solid and as advice, good advice for me. I will ask you for advice, and I always do, but it's to get a outside perspective, to assist me in making my decisions, right? To see if there are any differences or nuances that I may have missed in my own, assessment of a situation. And I believe you do the same. It's not necessarily to say, oh, I trust this guy, he knows what's best for me, I'm going to take that advice, and that's an example of, people who trust each other quite well in comparison to people who just you look at on the internet who are just shouting advice from the rooftops. You know?
I think it's really dangerous, no matter who you choose to take advice from, to just follow it blindly.
Totally.
Right. And another thing that's really important is to never really take advice from someone who's not where you want to be. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one thing that's helped me in overcoming challenges when I have chosen to use the advice that I've gained from someone is think about, are they actually where I want to be? Because everybody's got their opinion, man, and everybody gives you their advice. You and I both know that, a lot of times you get advice that you don't even fucking ask for.
That's right.
Right? What you do with it, though, is on you. And if you're taking advice from someone who's not in a position you want to be in, I think it's pretty fair to assume that you're probably not going to end up with the outcome that you want.
Yeah.
Right? It sounds like common sense, but people do it all the time. It's that person who takes legal advice from their buddy in jail. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. It's a good example. And I think that's a really good way of putting it. It's a really good way of putting it. Like, at the end of the day, like you said, it is us who ultimately makes the choice. And regardless of how well-intentioned people are, the outcome is going to be based on what they think you want, not necessarily what you want. And that's an important, discernment you need to make for yourself.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And yeah, man, I think you just need to be mindful of the outcome you want. Because that's the other thing. I think people think about when they're giving advice to other people of what the best outcome could be. And a lot of times it's what they think the best outcome is.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So if you've asked someone for advice and they've given you their advice, it could very well just be based on what they would want to happen if they were in your situation, but they're not in your situation. And that's why you've got to assess how that you think that's going to turn out for you if you're going to do that, and if it's actually going to result in what you want, not just what is generally seen as a good outcome.
Yeah. And I think it's even applicable to people who, you know, have achieved a lot in life. You know, you've got to be mindful that certain people stand for certain things, and they will talk about things that they care about and not necessarily what you care about, you know.
Yeah.
Just because their name is, you know, Gary Vee or, you know, Andy Frisella or, you know, The Rock, whatever, you know, they might be, they're all like fantastic people and they help people in different ways, right? But it doesn't mean that you need to believe in exactly what they say just because, you know, they're influential people in the world, right? And that's
I
key.
think like you never just hang your hat on what someone said because they said it.
Totally.
Right? I think it's not a clever way to be for yourself. And it's not to say you don't model people and the behaviors of those that work for you. Like in terms of, you know, if someone's had success in a certain area of life and they're giving you honest, good advice, it would be a good idea to follow that.
If that's what you want as well.
Correct. If that's what you want as well. But you have to work out if what you want is actually in line with where you're going to end up if you do what they said to do or you follow that advice. Right? Because like, you know, Gary Vee says to work your face off. And if you really want to, you know, have a career doing something you love, you're going to have to put in 18 hours a day doing that. Right? Or if you've got a full-time job and you want something else to kick off on the side, you know, you might work 9 to 5 and then come back, eat something. And then from 5:30 to 1 a.m., you work on your side hustle. And that might work out great for you if that side hustle is the thing you want to do for the rest of your life. Right? But then what if you have a family and you've got kids and you actually want to spend time with them? If you take that advice without actually stopping to assess what's important to you, you might end up way, way, way far away from where you want to be. If you stop to think about it, you're like, I want to do X, Y, Z so I can have more time with my kids. Like working your fucking face off every hour of the day and not spending any time with your kids is taking you away from that ultimate goal.
Yeah.
And it's stopping you from achieving what you want.
Totally.
So you've got to decide if where you're going to end up is where you want to be. Because the advice will work for a lot of things, but you might sacrifice things that you don't want to in the process.
That's right. And that's the important factor there, right? Like it'll work, but at what cost, right? If at the end of the day, like you said, if it's all about, you know, spending more time with your family and kids, you might not have them at that time, you know, by the time you sort of work your face off and neglect them for X amount of years, they might not be waiting there for you, right?
That's right. And there's a saying which always comes up if somebody asks me for any advice on anything. And I'm always like, the juice has to be worth the squeeze. It does. And you got to ask yourself that question. Whenever you're faced with a challenge and there's going to be effort involved, which there always is, right? The outcome is whatever juice you're going to end up with. And the squeeze is the effort. And you need to ask yourself, is the juice worth the squeeze?
Yeah. 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 Well, to close, man, let's just give everyone a bit of a taste of our a recent tool or approach to facing a challenge. So if I ask you what is a recent tool or approach you've used to approach any challenge, what would you say?
Yeah, so one thing I do every day, which has worked especially well for me at the moment, is so whatever challenges I have that are on my mind, I am taking the time. So we've been talking about that, and very practically, taking the time for me just involves going on a walk. So I walk every morning. It's like the first thing I do. So I wake up, brush my teeth, I just chuck on my workout gear, and I just lace my shoes up, head straight out the door. And it's the first thing I think of and I tackle, because for me, right, if I don't do that, it's kind of just on my mind all day.
Yeah.
And then I end up going in like mental circles about it. So I use that time to clear my head and just not have any other distractions around me. Like I'm not trying to do some other type of work. I'm not trying to think about this thing here and do that thing there. Like I'm just focused on thinking about where I want to be and the outcome that I want. And then I start to think about the solutions to that, what the range of possible solutions are. And I take that time while I walk to think about those different solutions. And then I play that out in my head. So, you know, I might have a challenge of, at the moment, how do I plug the gap in the sales that I have? All right. Because gyms and stuff have shut down. I'm like, well, who else can I sell to? And then I think about all the different other avenues I could take. And then I'm like, this is one avenue. How would I do that? Where will I end up? Where do I think I'll end up if I do that? Right? And the juice that I get out of that might not be worth the squeeze. So I think about the next option, but I try to work through all the options in my mind. And another thing that helps me as well is I learned from Shaun that like your fear holds no power on paper. And one thing that I do is, even when I walk, sometimes I think about the same thing like 30 times on a loop. Sometimes your mind just gets in this weird spot where it's like, I want this to happen. If I do this, this will happen. But then what if I do that? Same thing will happen. But if I do this, that'll happen. But you don't actually stop to think about what you're afraid of. And if that outcome is actually so bad, or if that challenge is actually such a hard challenge that you're giving it this much mental bandwidth. So, when that starts to happen, what I'll do is I'll just pull out a sheet of paper and I just write everything that's on my mind. Like no matter how simple or stupid it might sound, I'll just start writing and I'm like, this is the problem I have. I'm afraid that X, Y, Z will happen. And if that happens, it'll make me feel like this, that, and that. And then I just read it back to myself and I'm like, is that actually the way it is? And if it is, then I'm like, so what am I going to do about it? And then I'll go through that options phase. Because sometimes like you just think about things and you worry about them more than you should.
Yep.
So writing stuff out's helped me a lot as well. But the walk and actually going through all the options and taking the time, that's been a massive one for me. And then if you can't kind of resolve it, like try and organize your thoughts. And then realize that your fear has no place on paper, because it doesn't. I've noticed that once I start writing stuff out, if I get it down on the paper and you read it back, you realize it's not as bad as you thought, because your mind just has a way of keeping on running away from you. And if you just get it down once on paper, it's down, it's out. There's nothing else it can do. And then you can move on from there. And that's important.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah. And how about you, man? What's a challenge you've been facing and what's some practical steps you've been taking to overcome it?
Yeah, so I'll just talk to my daily practice. So meditation is a big practice of mine. It has been for many years, and it's been the most effective tool to help me deal with all sorts of challenges in my life. It was first introduced to me by a psychologist when I was seeing someone, during my cancer treatment, to deal with the stress and anxiety. But it has been so much more than that, especially in the last 3 or 4 years as I implemented it as a daily practice. I think what the challenges that I attempt to, quell or address in my daily life. And I think that this is a challenge that most people face, is that we're naturally addicted to thinking. We're addicted to, cognition and intellection of thought. And if we aren't aware of that, then it can run riot and dictate your life. So I've used the analogy before, and I use it a lot. And it's just that image of a cup of muddy water that's swirling around, and it lacks clarity until you bring a little stillness into that. If you stop stirring it and allow the dirt to settle to the bottom, so you can see through the water all the way to the bottom, that dirt being, all the thoughts, all the intellection, all the thinking, all the cognitive thinking that you're doing, trying to rationalize things to a, very, I guess, intellectual degree, trying to know everything, trying to, put everything into nice little boxes. Meditation just allows me to settle everything, and rather than lead from my mind, it allows me to, lead from my senses, not just to see things for what they are, but to, intuitively hear and feel them at a sensual level, right? And that in itself that's the concepts behind intuition and creativity and direction from the heart. And that's where I operate the best, because I know that it's pure, and I know that it's me, and that's where a lot of my work comes from. It's a creative space. It's not so much, fixated on structure or intellectualization or, any stepped approach to anything. It does flow, and it does move according to, how I feel, and that's important to me. So yeah, meditation is a powerful tool for that. And the more I practice, the deeper I go, the more clarity I get, and the easier it is to, just simply get into that state of clarifying what is important to me and what is not, outside of that, similar thing, journaling and writing. Writing is a craft that I really enjoy. Journaling is something that I teach many of my clients that I mentor. It's something that, like you said, it's a different medium for you to get your thoughts out onto, instead of allowing it to swirl around in your mind over and over and over. And again, once you let it out in a different form, then you can pick up different threads from your thoughts in different ways. Because when you read something, it's different to thinking about something, right? And if you read something, it might spark something else that leads you down another direction, to lead you to more wisdom or thoughts about, certain things that you might be stuck on. So I think it's a really, really powerful medium as well, to write and to get your thoughts out. Even, just talking about it, it's a powerful tool. It's just another medium, like I said, another way of expressing what's swirling around in your mind. You and I say all the time, Shaun, these conversations, it helps both of us, just because we're talking about things and expressing ourselves, So I think it's no different there.
Yeah, for sure. And I think like a big part of that is getting everything out, right? Because like you said, your analogy of the glass with the muddy water, so true. And I think it's like all those thoughts swirling around. If they keep swirling and swirling and swirling, right? It's always muddy. Whereas I feel like talking about things is kind of like the filter, like you're pouring it all out. And the other person is kind of like a sieve and helps you work that shit out and helps you separate your thoughts as well.
Yeah.
And then you can pull out and examine things. And that's important.
Yeah, totally. All right, cool. Well, let's put a cap on that one, mate.
Cool.
It's been a good conversation. Why don't you tell people where they can find you, man?
Yeah, best place to find me is just on my Instagram. So Shaun_Coop, SHAUN_COOP. And how about you, mate?
Yep. Just find me on my website, findingspace.co. You can drop me an email there, or on my socials, either Instagram or Facebook. It's findingspace.co.
Cool. And we've also got our own email for the podcast. So if you guys have any feedback, anything you'd like us to talk about or discuss, or if you're someone who like to look at coming onto our podcast, that email is thehustleandflowpodcast@gmail.com. And as always, we just ask guys, we've got a little fee for the show. And that's just if you took something from this conversation, if you enjoyed it, you got a little nugget, or there's something in here that you feel would help someone that you know, please share it with just one other person. That's how we do grow the podcast, and how we, get these conversations out into the ears of other people that hopefully find something valuable and are helped by listening to these conversations as well. So if you can, just share it with one other person, please. And we're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Stitcher, so really easy to share. And if you've been enjoying the podcast, we'd ask you as well if you can just subscribe, jump on, give us a rating, drop a review. We'd love to hear what you think about the podcast. And until next time, guys.
See you later, guys.
Catch you.